welcome back to another episode of Learn with IPv Dre. Today, we're going to be working on how to configure a DHCP server on Windows 2019 for Active Directory. So the beauty about Windows Server 2019 is that you can configure a DHCP server for your Active Directory domain, your Active Directory network, if you will. And you can also configure a DHCP server that stands alone from Active Directory, right? So you can create, you can use Windows 2019 to create a DHCP server that exists completely separate from Active Directory, right? Now, there's a whole bunch of other operating systems and programs on which you can create DHCP server, but Windows Server has a lot of features packed into one that allows for you to, create your DNS servers, your DHCP server, and so many different things. I believe you could create like a file system on there as well. There's so many things you could do with Windows Server. I'm actually thinking about buying it, and after the evaluation is up, I'm thinking about just buying it and using it on my lab and probably my home network as a whole, because there's a bunch of things that I want to do. I want to install a NAS. I want to install many other different things in my network, especially as we get a bigger place and evolve, right? So I know I'm gonna get a little bit long-winded here. We're already 2 minutes in. There's gonna be some timestamps down below so you can hop around if you will. But for now, I'm going to go into the basic, definition of what a DHCP server is, and then we're going to move on to the demonstration, which is going to be an adventure. I treat these videos like adventures because you never know what can happen in these demonstrations, right? Sometimes I make a boo-boo and have to correct on the fly, and we learn a lot from that, right? So let's get into it. What is a DHCP server? And I got some notes to my right here, and I'm going to just read off of it if you don't mind. A DHCP server automates the process of supplying IP addresses to hosts on a network. It supplies their host address, subnet mask, default gateway address, and DNS server address. So the DHCP server essentially is the one-stop shop for a host to pick up its network settings, or as I like to call it, network settings and network configurations. And you can have, your DNS server included into the DHCP server settings, or you can manually configure it if you want, but that is an option. Now, DHCP servers can be configured on many different devices. It doesn't have to be these big air-conditioned, cooled servers in some server room across the country. It can be, your DHCP server could be on a Raspberry Pi like I have right here. It can be on a Cisco router. It can also be on a layer 3 switch. It could be on a computer, a laptop. It can be on many different things. All you need is just a software that can provide that service and therefore the functionality of a DHCP server. Now, I want to go into the details of how the hosts receive their IP addresses, because I'm a network guy and I love this stuff. We're going to go into the details, and I think this is going to actually help you if you're studying for the Network Plus or the CCNA. And if you are watching this and you're looking to be a system admin, this could also help you a little bit as well, right? So the DHCP process, or the process of the host and the server communicating to configure these network settings, is called DORA, right? Let's call it the DORA process, right? So what does DORA stands for? It's actually a beautiful name. DORA is actually I think it's a cartoon character or what have you, but it's a memorable name that we can use to memorize the process of the DHCP server configuration, right? So DORA, D stands for discovery, and essentially what the discovery is, or the discover message is, when the host comes onto the network and it wants to get an IP address, it sends out a broadcast message in the form of a discover message, hoping to discover a DHCP server on the network. Now, I got some notes here, and more formally, discover is sent by the DHCP client to find a willing DHCP server. Now, this message is sent to the broadcast address on the subnet, right? It's sent to 255.255.255.255, and the source address in this packet is going to be all 0.0.0.0. Remember, when we're talking about the reserved addresses and IP addresses and stuff, 0.0.0.0 is reserved, and this is what it's reserved for. It's used as a blank source IP address because the host doesn't have a source IP address, and it needs to put something into the source IP address in the packet field, right? So that's a source, and the destination is 255.255.255.255. So it sends this message to that address, that destination address, and the router, the default gateway, broadcasts it all throughout the network. Now, that message never goes beyond the default gateway, the router, but it does broadcast it out to everyone on that subnet, right? So essentially what it does is it eventually reaches a DHCP server. The DHCP server realizes that it's for it, and it sends what's called an offer message. Now, an offer message can either be broadcast or unicast, right? So an offer message is sent by a DHCP server to offer to lease to that client a specific IP address and inform the client of its other parameters, right? So that specific IP address exists within a scope, as you see we're going to configure in a second in our DHCP server. Now, this scope contains the allowed IP addresses that the DHCP server can distribute automatically. Now, you can also set up the scope to split the subnet into as many ranges as possible, or as many ranges as possible. And you can also have different DHCP servers cover different scopes, right? So I think that's, now that I'm thinking about it, I think that's more prevalent for if you're using one DHCP server for a whole organization. You can actually, you can't use, I don't think it'd be smart to use one DHCP server for a whole organization because that's a single point of failure. But you can use multiple DHCP servers for a whole organization, obviously, and then you can split the scope of a specific network address or subnet address, whatever you want to call it, subnet number, into specific subnets and therefore scopes, if you will, right? So with that being said, once the host receives this offer message, whether it's through a broadcast or a unicast message, it responds with the request to accept that specified IP address. Now, you might be wondering, how does the host know that that message is for it? So when the original message is sent, the discover message, the initiating message is sent, the client is the client defines, or I believe the frame or somewhere in the message there's defined client hardware address, right? Maybe the MAC address or something of the sort. And that's how the host can identify that that message is for it, and it essentially sends back a request, right? And the other host that received that broadcast message will ignore it. And it'll at that point send a request back to the DHCP server requesting that IP address. And then the DHCP server sends a message back to the host, which is called an acknowledgement, saying, okay, cool, we confirmed it, you can have this IP address, and it leases it, right? So it says, for acknowledgement sent by the DHCP server to assign the address and to list the mask, default router, and DNS server IP address, right? And I got that from the CCNA Official Cert Guide, Volume 2 by Wendell Odom, right? I love his, absolutely love his explanation, right? So that's the basics of the whole DHCP DORA process and the whole definition behind, basic definition behind what a DNS server is, right? So now we're going to move on to doing some labbing, right? So we're not too bad on time. So let's go ahead and do some labbing. Let me show you how to set up this DHCP server. So first, we want to run Server Manager, right? And how you can run Server Manager is, probably already know this, but if you are completely new, this is a great way to learn, right? Just watch and learn. So I would also say follow along too. So you can run Server Manager one of three ways, right? It should be pinned in your taskbar already. If not, then you can go here and you can click Server Manager, and then you can also do this. My virtual machine's a little laggy. Server Manager, and you could click in and enter that way. Let me pull this up a little bit. Let me get closer. I'm pulling my my computer closer, right? All right, so let's click in the Server Manager, and then we're gonna click Add Roles and Features, right? And then we're gonna click the next button, and we click Role-Based or Feature-Based Installation. And we're gonna select the host. This is the only host we have right here. And click Next. And then we're going to click DHCP, wait, hold on. Did I click the right one? We can click DHCP server. I clicked the wrong one. What did I click before? I think I clicked device health attestation. What's that? Let me see something. Yeah, I clicked the wrong one. So make sure that you're clicking this box right here. Let me see if it's showing. Yep, it is. There you go. So you're going to click Add Features. I'm just making sure that I'm following the right instructions. Don't want any boo-boos, because this can get, my lab is gonna be a little bit complicated in comparison to yours, because I actually have a DHCP server running on my Cisco lab, which is my router, which is what I'm using to demonstrate. So in all of my videos for, you know, labbing purposes, for security purposes, I always demonstrate on my Cisco lab. So I have my DHCP server set up on my Cisco lab, and that's something that we're going to have to contend with in a second, as you'll see. Because you might be wondering, can I set up 2 DHCP servers on the network? I sure can, but the thing with that is I have to make sure that the configurations don't overlap. And you see what I'm talking about in a second, right? So you're gonna click Next. Click Next again, and then we're gonna click Install. So it's gonna take a little bit. So as I was saying before, I got 2 DHCP servers set up, which is my Cisco router, and this one, which I am actually setting up right now. And that can be an issue because of IP address conflicts, because of mainly because IP address conflicts. But what I can do is I don't necessarily, what I want to do when I set this DHCP server up is show you how I'm going to disable the DHCP server on my Cisco router, but you don't necessarily have to do that. As a matter of fact, we're gonna take a little detour and see in a second. We're gonna see what we can do to set up this second DHCP server, right? See, all right, so we're gonna click complete configuration, right? If you somehow clicked out of that, right? Say you didn't click into this and you said, you click close, right? What you want to do is you want to come up here to this yellow attention symbol right here. You can click notifications and you can just click complete DHCP configuration under the post deployment configuration notification tab, right? Click and click next. This mouse is a little wonky. I need a new mouse pad because I don't actually have a mouse pad. Click next. So now here's where you can choose to set up a standalone DHCP server which is aside from Active Directory, which is outside Active Directory, or you can configure this within your Active Directory, authorized for your users on this Active Directory domain, right? So if you want to set up a standalone DHCP server, you click skip AD authorization, right? So we're gonna click commit. So that's done, right? Now, just pulling this up real quick. It's pretty straightforward. You click close. And now the next thing you want to do is, we're in server manager, right? Click tools, then go to DHCP. This is going to be the DHCP, I guess, management console, right? And let's expand this. Make sure that you guys can see this. Yep, looks good. So now what you're going to do is you're going to come over here, press the down arrow. You're going to click this. And then, let me see. Click expand IPv4, then you're gonna click action, new scope, right? So now, click new scope. You can name the server. I'm gonna name it AD DHCP server, and I'll put the description as AD, Active Directory. Click next. Now, this is where we're going to set the IP address range, right? Now, here I can choose, no, I can't even do that. So when I said I was gonna take a detour, I was considering splitting off the subnets between these two DHCP servers, right? So like I said, I have my Cisco server and I have my AD DHCP server, right? And my Cisco server, my Cisco DHCP server is actually giving out IP addresses to all clients on the subnet, regardless if they're part of Active Directory or not, right? So I was considering splitting off the scopes between the two respective DHCP servers, but I don't actually have it scoped in for my Cisco router, and I'm not going to go into the command line right now to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to disable my Cisco DHCP server, and I'm going to go ahead and configure the scope here, right? So now the scope, we're going to start with a starting address of 192.168.10.100. And the end IP address is going to be 192.168.10.254. So me personally, we have a /24, which means that we have a good 254 IP addresses that we can give out to clients. But just in my mind, for how I'm approaching this problem, you know, practicing, pretending as if I'm setting up a network for a job, a company, or something like that, I want to reserve some IP addresses for servers, one of which is our actual DHCP server, right? Because remember, our DHCP server has a static address which is on, or pretty much assigned to that server that is permanently, that is on 24/7. That's the idea of a server. You don't ever want to have your server off or inaccessible for any period of time. So one of the ways to make sure it's accessible 100% of the time, or at least most of the time, because you can't really do anything about the server going down because of maybe a maintenance problem or whatever, you want to make sure that you give a static IP address, right? You don't want it to use DHCP. So that's what we're doing here. You set your start IP address, you set your end IP address, and then you have your length. It's going to ask you configure settings that propagate to DHCP client. It just means right here, set the subnet mask that you want, right? So we have a /24, it's 24 bits. And as you can see, the subnet mask is 255.255.255.0. Click next. Wait, what? It conflicts with the existing scope. What are they talking about? See, these are the boo-boos that I'm talking about. What am I? Is there something I'm not seeing? Into the range. The address range and mask conflict with an existing scope. Oh, okay. I had set this up. Okay, I'm gonna deactivate. Okay, so, okay, let me explain. So when I was labbing this up, I labbed this up 2 times already. I had already created a DHCP server and I deleted it, and then I re-added it just now. Or maybe it was already installed. No, it wasn't already installed. But when I re-added it, I guess the scope wasn't deleted. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna go ahead and deactivate this scope. It's not even active. What's going on here? I'm gonna delete it. I'm just gonna delete this scope. Let's just delete that scope. Yeah, I made a boo-boo, right? So again, if you want to add a scope, simply right click, click new scope, click next, AD DHCP server AD, right? And then click next. This is the scope that we're gonna set. I was like, what's going on? I just started changing stuff immediately. Like, I know I'm not bugging. I know I subnetted this right. This is simple /24. Like, it's not really that serious. Oops. All right. So this should work. This should be good. There we go. So your start IP address and your end IP address. Reserve some IP addresses for servers that's going to be on the network, right? Ideally, if this was more of a bigger company, we'd use, you know, a bigger subnet mask, right? Or a smaller subnet mask to allow for more subnets. So let's go. So it says right here, type the IP address that you want to exclude. If you want to exclude a single address, type an address in start IP address. Nope, we don't need to do that. Let's click next. Now you can set the lease times if you want. You can set the lease times if you want. Maybe you can set it for 8 days, 8 hours, 0 minutes, whatever. Whatever you want. So let's just click next. And now it says when clients obtain an IP address, they are given DHCP options such as the IP address of routers, default gateway, DNS, and WINS settings for that scope. Settings you select here are for the scope and override settings configured in the server options folder for this server. Do you want to configure the DHCP options for this scope now? And the answer is going to be yes. And you'll see why in a second. Router, default gateway, we need that. We absolutely need that. 168.10.10. Keep on tabbing over. That is the default gateway of this network. That's the IP address for my Cisco router, which is coincidentally acting as a DHCP server right now. So we click next. And now you see something interesting, right? You see that automatically the parent domain is in the box, right? So we have ipvdre.local. If you have an Active Directory set up already, domain set up already, it should be automatically populated in a box. If you don't, all you need to do is just put the server name in, put the IP address, and it'll go into these settings, right? I had these two set up already, the Cisco router and the DNS server as well, the AD server as the DNS server, right? So you're just gonna click next. We're not using a WINS server, and that will probably pop up for you if you've been following along in my past videos where we're setting up Active Directory. You could check out that playlist if you want, and we can pretty much, you know, move on from there. So do you want to activate the scope now? I'm gonna go ahead and put no. Let's go ahead and put no. I think this is a best practice because I have an active DHCP server on the network already. So I don't want any IP address conflicts and none of that stuff. So he's gonna click next, and we're done with that, right? Click finish. This scope is not active yet, right? So there we go. We have the option to activate it. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move on over to our Cisco router terminal or access server, and we're going to shut down the DHCP server from there. Let me just make sure I have the right one. All right, here we go. So now we're just gonna do a few quick commands, nothing too serious. Let's open back up. Let's open it back up. And then what we're gonna do is enable conf t. Let me open this up for you guys. Make sure you guys can see. Enable conf t. Let me make this a little bit bigger. Make this a little bit bigger for you guys. Let's try 20. Oh, that's too big. No, that's fine. I think you guys can see that well. Yeah, you guys can see that way better now. While my head is cutting it off. All right, conf t, and now we're just gonna simply put the no IP DHCP pool sub. I forgot what I named it. I named it something super complicated for no reason. Sub interface 1R1. That's the name of the pool. Sub interface 1R1. Right, so now we effectively shut down our DHCP server on the Cisco side, right? On our network side. Now what we're going to do is we're going to hop back over here, right? Make sure that you guys can see everything well, and let's pull back up our server and let's activate it. So now we activated the scope. Now let's just make sure, first and foremost, we need to make sure that this server is accessible. And how do we do that? Let's go to control panel. Let's take the long way. Network. Then we're gonna go to which one is it? Network and Sharing Center. I can never remember this. Low key. Ethernet, and then we're gonna go to properties. And low key, be forgetting where this stuff is. All right, so we already have the necessary settings. We don't need to change anything. On your server side, right? This is your DHCP. This is Windows Server, right? We have our Windows Server. It is acting as an active domain, Active Directory domain, domain controller. It's a server, right? We also have DHCP services installed on it. So since it is a server, we need to make sure that a static IP address is set so that the other hosts can reach it, whether it's for Active Directory, whether it's for DHCP, whether it's for DNS, and any other services currently running on this machine, right? So now we have the IP address set, static IP address outside of the scope that the DHCP server is allowed to configure or automate or supply. And we have the subnet mask, which is in the same subnet as our default gateway, and the every other host that's going to be, obviously on the network. And we have the DNS server set, alternate DNS server set, right? So again, I keep checking the quality. I'm very obsessive about quality, right? So boom, that's set. That is our server. Our server is set up. We're good to go now, right? Now we're gonna come over to our Windows 10 machine. This might be some client. In this case, we have IT boss, right? I have the same characters in this story from a previous episode, and we're just gonna, go along with that. Now, let's go to control panel. First, let me see something. Let's see what our current IP address is, right? So we're gonna do this, IP config, see what it currently is, right? So it's that. It shouldn't be that one. Oops, I clicked out of it. So CMD, and then we're gonna do, we saw that it's an IP address that's out of the subnet, right? So what we want to do is we're gonna set it, control panel. So we're gonna set it, network and internet, network and sharing, properties. We're gonna set it for DHCP. Obtain IP address automatically, obtain DNS server address automatically. So we see that all of those are set up already, right? Now, what we're gonna do is we're going to get our host to start the DORA process, right? So we can pretend like this is coming up onto the network. It has an old IP address that's stale. IP config, it won't be able to be used, right? IP config / release. So it's currently releasing the IP address right now. Hopefully we don't run into any boo-boos. Yeah, it released the IP address, and we see from our previous lessons, right? What is this right here? This is link local IPv6 address, right? That's automatically configured so that it can communicate with other devices on the local subnet who also have link local IP addresses configured, right? So as we can see, we have no information here. Now we're gonna start that process, that DORA process, ipconfig renew. Now it's going to reach out to our DHCP server that we have set up. And then an error occurred while renewing interface Ethernet. The DHCP client has obtained an IP address that is already in use on the network. The local interface will be disabled until the DHCP client can obtain a new address. There's always something that I always screw up. But we're not perfect, right? Oh, there it goes. See? You just had to do it again. I never got that error message before. I had never got that error message before. It's only now that we got that error message. All right, so we can see, this is funny. We can see here that we have all of our settings, right? We still got the same link local IP address. You can compare them. And then we have we're connected to ipvdre.local. That's where our DHCP server lives. 255.255.255.0. No idea what the default gateway is. Let me hit it again, see what happens. I don't know, but it got an IP address. Let's do IP config. Let's do IP config. IP config, not IP config. IP config slash all. Where's the default gateway? It's not showing the default gateway for some reason. I don't know why. If any of you know why the default gateway is not showing up, you can let me know in the comment section, because I have no idea why it's not showing up right now. But that's pretty much it. That is how you set everything up. Let me see if there's anything that I missed, anything that I want to play around with. No, that's pretty much it. That is pretty much it. And we did well on time too. We didn't really go too hard with the time, but I'm still curious as to why the DNS didn't show up. The default gateway didn't show up. Can I look into it? Let me see. Let me drag this out. I hope you guys were able to see that. Split scope. What does split scope mean? Splitting DHCP scope between multiple DHCP servers can increase fault tolerance. As I was explaining before, fault tolerance is allowing for, redundancy, right? With the split scope configuration, if one server becomes unavailable, the other server can take its place and continue to lease new IP addresses or renew existing clients. Splitting DHCP scopes also helps to balance server loads. So yeah, we don't have an additional server, so we're not even going to walk through that. But what I wanted to do was I wanted to look at scope options. That's pretty much it. Not going to keep you guys any longer, but that's essentially how you set up a DHCP server on Windows Server 2019 for Active Directory. I love doing these little labs because there's always something that goes on that throws me off, and it forces me to problem solve and troubleshoot on the fly, right? So if you like videos like this, click the video on the screen, and I will talk to you guys next time.